Hey, team, welcome to another edition of the Rugby League Lounge weekly show. And today, well, it's officially the first episode of the off season, coming fresh out of grand final week. Obviously, Sunday we saw the season come to a conclusion. Sadly, saw it come to conclusion, and we're me and Joel are here to kind of reflect on the season in a way that other people don't. Like Joel summarized a couple of weeks back on one of his pods, and I kind of took offense to it at the time, but now I'm thinking he's actually right. I've got a bit of a quirky way of doing things, and we're going to be looking at sliding doors moments for the top 8 teams. So little things that could have changed the outcome, either good or bad for these teams. But before we get into that, I realise I haven't really introduced you again today, Joel. So, Joel, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, good, mate. I meant quirky in the best way possible. So,
exactly.
don't take any offense to that one. But look, I'm all right. I've been able to steer clear of all the mischief so far. You haven't seen my face in the papers or in the media. So, look, I'm unlike some of these players. I'm all good at the moment. First week without football has been a struggle. No shows to watch during the week. No NRL 360, things like that. But hey, I've realised I've got a missus, and I completely forgot I had one. So there we go.
Well, it's good you've realised that, mate. I'd be concerned to find out if it took you a bit longer to find that out. But yeah, no, good on you, mate. Good to finding probably more productive ways to spend your time. So good on you, buddy. But yeah, like I said, we're gonna look today at the top 8 teams. We'll see how we get on. We'll see how this goes with a few guys, but we might do the bottom 8 teams next week. But what I mean by sliding doors moments is just looking at, was there one thing in the season that could have changed their outcome dramatically, or something that, like, because at the end of the day, well done to the Panthers, but there's a little bit of luck that goes into it too. They definitely deserved it. But what's to say if luck kind of swayed different ways, or decisions that definitely, we didn't realize at the time had big as consequences as they did. So I'm going to start us off because just to give us a bit of a clear direction on what we're kind of looking for today. I'm going to start with the Titans. I was talking to Joe at the start, probably the toughest one to do, really, because it's like, did they exceed expectations? Did they meet them? Did they not meet expectations? And when you look at the ladder, a lot of people probably thought, yeah, this is where they meant to be. But at the end of the day, they had, a fair share more losses than wins. So for me, it's looking at how this team probably could have been, like, arguably in the same spot, maybe a little bit better, competing for the 8, competing for the top 4, but actually just have more wins on their board. And I'm going to look at the game here, round 6 against the Manly Seagulls. Now, why I want to point this out is I reckon they probably, look, they lost this game 36-0. And famously, this is the game that Tom Trbojevic come back. Now, for me, why I think this is an unlucky moment for the Titans is obviously, like, no one saw Tommy Turbo's great season coming to this extent. But for him to kind of unleash straight away into being his return game against the Titans, who were traveling much better than the Seagulls, I remember them being favourites in this game too, despite Tommy's coming back. But he really put the job on them, 36-0. And I just think, if I look back at that, was that just such a, to lose by that amount to a team that had been traveling so horrible, that must have been very demoralising for them. And I wonder if that was just a confidence detriment for them. And I just wonder if they didn't have that loss so early, and that loss of, like I said, it was, unbelievable. Tommy just showed his impact straight from the get-go. I just wonder if that was enough to kind of stop that momentum, and they really probably were off the rails early. Do you remember that game in particular, Joel, from the season?
Yeah, I remember the game. I think it was I think it stands out as well because this was the first season the Titans had come into for a long time where people were talking about him positively and were saying things like they'll make the top 8 and things like that, which I haven't had for a number of years now. So a bit of pressure, a bit of expectation for the side. So to lose like that so early on was probably a bit of a slap in the face moment to say, look, stop listening to what the outside noise is saying and get your backsides into work really, and get on the training paddock, and let's make sure this season is what we at least want it to be, which they needed to make the 8 to have some kind of a successful year. That's what pretty much everyone was singing for the Titans, and probably lucky they had that sort of performance early on to just snap him into a bit of gear. But as you said, it's kind of hard to say that as well, because they did have more losses than wins. So it is a hard one.
Yeah. I just think it was one of those things where the Titans, I think they were like kind of seeing where they were at before that. I think it was 3 wins, 2 losses, and it was kind of probably predicted. And like you said, it was the first season of real expectations for a long time. And it was the first game where it was like, this is the one game where we didn't see coming, and not that we just didn't see coming, it was the absolute hammering. So I just wonder if it was just a real reality check for them. It'd just be interesting to see if Tommy didn't come back, what that result would have been, and if the dominoes kept falling in the right place. But like you said, it could have been the opposite. It could have been one of those kicks in the ass early, but the way they responded, like we said, it was one of those real hard seasons to judge for the Titans. So I don't think it was a kick in the ass, because I think they would have probably put a better season together if that was the case. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to look at it. But like I said, the Titans were a hard one to pick. But we're going to get on probably another hard one to pick now. I've given you the job of looking at the sliding doors moment for the Knights, mate, and I'll give you a little time to ponder on it. Is there anything that sticks out in your eyes for what could have been a moment that, could have seen the Knights propel into, having a better season, maybe even top 4 contenders, or the other way? What have you gone for, Joel?
I haven't gone for a game as such. I've gone for just the fact with the Knights, just the run of injuries they sort of had with the key players. And I'm talking mainly Ponga, obviously, there. And I think this year more than ever, we all know Ponga, how good he is and things like that. But just the importance he has for this Knights side, which they were lucky they had him healthy at the right time of year. Otherwise, they would have probably been smashed first week of the finals. And just throughout the whole year, it was just one of those years. And I think his injury just sums up their year overall. The fact that they weren't able to get anything consistently happening with KP, and then they basically had the same sort of season. They were just so up and down, and they finished 7th. But goodness me, if you told me they finished 12th, I would have believed you. If I didn't see the ladder, it was just one of those things. So, as you said, it's a hard side to say a sliding doors moment as such, where there's a game that points it around, because they were too up and down. There was no real consistency with that. But I just thought the injury to Ponga has just really, for mine, I don't think Pearce is the answer there anymore. I think that's been done. I think his time to move on with the club would be this off season, because he was thereabouts some of those games where they just weren't offering anything at all still. So I think Ponga is the guy for that side. They need to do whatever they can to keep him. I know he's going to have the new Brisbane team no doubt knocking his door, making him a priority. But yeah, I think the Ponga injury summed up the Knights, and it was just, if they kept him healthier for the whole year, they probably would have been up nudging towards that sort of 5th, 6th position. But in the end, they were 6 points behind 6th place, and that's 3 wins, obviously. And they just never seemed in the hunt to do anything other than the 7th place finish.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you have to have more confidence yourself, mate. I think you've done brilliant there. I think that's funny, because I think like one of the biggest issues with the Knights is their reliance on 2 players, but they still were able to, like, their main 2 players missed a lot of time. And I'll get the Pearce first and then go to Ponga, but to still do that and obviously know how much they impact the game. It's one of those seasons, just like, I think they should take it as a win this season. 2 years in a row making the finals is not an easy feat, especially with a team that's not, a lock it in to make the 8 as well. But with Pearce, it's funny because I think I said that on a podcast we did not too long ago that I think it's kind of a divorce waiting to happen. And I think it's more just by the time they sort things out too, and they get a bit of a roll on, I think Pearce is probably going to be at the end of his career, or definitely at the end of his value. So especially with all the little dramas throughout the year, I think it is one of those things like it might be best to see you later now and actually just end it on good terms to an extent. But yeah, I agree. And Ponga's had that 2018 was sensational year, but I think Ponga has really been overlooked because of, yes, the inconsistency in terms of how many games he's played, but and also just the amazing play of fullbacks as well. Because it's the best I ever felt about Kalen Ponga. I felt his all-round game has improved. I do think I would love. It's funny because it's one of those things against the Eels. Everyone would say keep going left side because that's where your strength is. But I want to see him, and I think at the time, yes, but I want to see him be able to be more of a playmaker in other areas and create plays as well. So because that's why I think they did lean towards him as the 6 because he can keep on that left side a bit. But I want to see him roam around more. But in terms of his positives, he's a lot more you can see he wants to be a leader out there. The effort levels in 2019, I remember in particular, were questioned. But I think he has just he's relied less on his talent now. And there's a lot of things to love about his games. And I think still he's probably playing through injuries too. So that toughness as well. So Ponga's a huge part of this team. And honestly, I think he is just a little bit hard done by because of what I mentioned. Yeah, the injuries and the talent in the forward position. He's like, in terms of, you just assume he's a top 5 fullback in this game, but with the amount of talent there, it's hard. Like, he'd be fighting with the likes of, like, obviously you got Turbo, Teddy, Pappenhausen, Latrell, and he's probably fighting out with maybe Pappy in there as well, but Gaffo. And there's a couple others at the top of my head and a couple guys that can switch to fullback in different situations like Joey Manu. But yeah, I think it's a great point. It depends. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if the 2 main guys were healthy all season. I want to go with your team now, and I deliberately did this. So I gave you the Storm and I gave myself the Panthers and the Eels. There's probably a reason I've given myself the Panthers too. But this one's obvious, and it's actually injury related too. It's the Reid Mahoney injury. And that goes, and like why I mentioned the Panthers too. Look, there's a lot that could have gone differently in that game from the referee's hands, but even with all those calls that went against them, they're still in the game, and it's just interesting to know if nothing against Ray Stone, but at the end of the day, he is not a 80-minute hooker, or that's not the best way to be utilising him. And instead, who would have been there? And it's not just any slouch. It's Reid Mahoney, who was your MVP this season. He was tremendous, great season. And you just think a 2-point game, if he was in the game, how good would have he been? I'll let you kind of go into that. How do you feel? Look, and this might bring up some wounds here, but look, if Reid Mahoney's in the game against the Penrith, we're probably not talking about Penrith as the premiers, are we, Joel?
Nah, and I think an interesting point to say here, I know a lot of people have said stuff about Ray Stone. He actually wasn't the second string hooker. That game, we actually had our first three in line hookers unavailable through injury. So we had Reid Mahoney, we had Lussick, and we had also Nathaniel Roach, which is at the club who played during the year as well. Good. All 3 were injured, which I don't remember the last time a club went into a final series with their 3 choices out injured. So it was sort of one of those cases where it just sort of had to happen. And I felt sorry. I do feel sorry for him now looking back on it. I wasn't at the time. I was pretty filthy with some of his mistakes he made. But Ray Stone's one of those sort of guys that come on and play lock and really give it to the teams. He's not a hooker. I think everyone knows that by now. But yeah, the loss of Reid Mahoney sort of summed up us, because when he left, we had that bit of a drought. It took us a while to get back going and used to playing without him. I think he's a much bigger focal point to our attack and our side than a lot of people give him credit for. I know everyone rates Harry Grant so highly and rightly so, but I'll tell you what, both at full strength, I think it's a really close battle, and that's how important Reid Marnie is. He was spoken about in Origin, and it looked like he was going to get the start before Grant for the game one this year until he was sort of dipped in form and got the first injury. So yeah, it was a massive blow. I really, really rate Reid. I think he's had I think people forget because he had the last 5-6 weeks out how good of a season he did have overall. He hasn't seemed to get much mention this year about the key positions where really, if you think about this year, not many of the hookers had consistent game time apart from probably Brandon Smith, really. So, and I've seen people still give their hooker of the year to Harry Grant, who didn't really play that much, and it was a lot off the bench. So I just sort of summed up this year with hookers, but yeah, the Reid Marnie was a huge loss.
Yeah, if in terms of like per minute MVP in the hooker department, it's out of Brandon Smith and Reid Mahoney for me. And Brandon Smith was helped by having that rotation that really got the best out of him too. So yeah, that start of the season, the first 6 rounds, I think I remember thinking about making a post about him being the best player in terms of form. He was that good. I think him and Nathan Cleary were probably the 2 standouts. But yeah, but hey, he'll be back healthy next year and be interesting to see. I think they will need to find a spot on him that Queensland side, and it's tough too because I think Ben Hunt is best utilised as a hooker, especially at Origin. But God, he's definitely in terms of the hookers right now, he's top 5 easily. I think he played more consistent, like you said, than Cook and Coruscant and Grant as well. Look, up to you now, mate. The Roosters. Look, an interesting season for the Roosters, and it's probably, obviously injury concerns is a big one too. Is that where you're going to go today, mate? Is that your biggest sliding doors moment, or have you gone for another direction?
No, it obviously is, but I'm going to go at it with a different point of view than what we've done so far with the injury news.
Love that.
It's made the people around the club and the other players step up. So they've obviously had, what was it all up? They had 4 retirees during the year, or 3 retirees, which is unheard of, really. And Josh Morris was on almost one leg towards the end of it and managed to just scrape himself home. But it's just one of those things where they lost so many key players, and this is why I thought Robbo deserved Coach of the Year for mine, because he looked after all that. But then to watch people like Tedesco step up. Tedesco at the start of the year, if you think about it, he had Friend, he had Cordner, he had Brett Morris, he had Josh Morris, he had all these leaders around him. And then all of a sudden he gets pushed in to be the leader. He had no one else around him. Luke Keary was injured for round 1. That loses your first string main playmaker, who most people would have thought would have been in the Blues team this year with Cleary at full strength. So he's been talked about for the last couple of years for that. And then you've got a rookie step up in Sam Walker, which had massive raps in the start of the year, and he actually came and delivered. So look, I don't think it was the injuries as such. Obviously that hurts to have that caliber of players, but it's more so that it forced some of these really good players, like even Angus Crichton for mine. I think everyone knows he's a good player, but boy, he stepped up this year. Him and Tupanua on the edges really established themselves as really good, hard and first graders now who deserve and are demanding the 11 and 12 jerseys. So for mine, it was the fact that it forced players to step up, and the Roosters held it together for long enough. They ran out of puff. I think that was summed up just having so many players injured. But then the way they were actually able to just manage these injuries was just incredible to watch, because I think if you look at the clubs, I think apart from maybe one more, I think any other club is finishing rightly so down the bottom of the ladder with just the caliber of players that are missing.
Yeah, I think it was a very good indicator of how far this club has come and how strong they are. So probably the best way to sum up your point, mate, is probably like this club is, probably short term in terms of winning the premiership, they're not better off. But in terms of every other aspect, they're actually a stronger club because of the year they've had to because of the injuries and everything, all the adversity they've had to overcome. And then I'll lean into my next one, mate, which is the Seagulls. This one, look, I look at the Seagulls, and the first thing I thought of was their 2 losses in the finals. The 2 losses in the finals, and they just went sideways straight away, and ultimately that put them into bad field position, and put them in their defense, and I looked at ways like, how can you improve their defense? Not so much, but I'm kind of looking at that. How can they get more direct, put themselves in better field position, turn themselves into less one-dimensional at times? Now, I'm not saying they're one-dimensional because, yes, you scream at Tommy, but Tommy cracked so many other options that, there's so many things to consider. And I looked at this guy, and I thought the year obviously last year they had a bad year, and a lot of that was due with Tommy's injury. But one of my I try to make like an underrated MVP for each season. And Manisi Fanu was huge in 2019. And I just wonder, and it's nothing against Lachlan Croker. Now, I wonder if this Fanu actually comes off the bench, but then Walker's probably, then his role has decreased, and he was a really good shining light. That was one of the biggest surprises this season, Dylan Walker's improvement as a utility. But I just wonder, Finu now, I don't want to get into the complications of his issue, but say if everything comes up, or like everything just works out the way it was, and it was just a misunderstanding and stuff like that. And I think we are going to be hearing a few things of late, just hearing the YKTR boys talking on a podcast earlier this week. But just say if he was here, none of that was to happen. I just wonder how the attack would have looked, and if they were going to play more direct. Look, this guy was the reason that Coruscant is winning the premiership at the Panthers. And I must admit, I actually thought I didn't mind the decision, especially not knowing what was to come of Finu's career, in terms of him missing time because of the off-field stuff, because he was out playing Coruscant. They were getting the same opportunities. They were working probably, I think Coruscant was starting, Finu would come off the bench, and Finu was, providing more impact. And I think they ultimately switched roles. Finu was starting and was doing the exact same thing. So I just wonder if the directness and he was just there. He was offloading. He was always there for an offload as well. I just wonder if his style of attack would have, I think at times they didn't trust him. They had some big boppers this year, but they didn't trust themselves going forward a lot of the times. And I think maybe with a threat like Finu, he would have centralized them a bit more and avoided the mistakes that they made against the bigger teams, and put them in some vulnerable situations. So, what is your take on Finu as the player? And it's one of those things that's probably, we haven't seen him for 2 years. But so if any memories in particular, mate, what is your take on Finu as the player and his potential impact, if he's able to get back on the paddock anytime soon?
I think if he kept playing, obviously he would have made a difference. Lachlan Croker isn't a hooker, so he's sort of the makeshift answer, which I don't remember the last time someone won a comp with makeshift players in makeshift positions. It's that crucial in this day and age. You've got to play people in their positions. But I'm a bit worried about Fanu coming back, to be honest with you, because I just think because he's had that 2 years out of the game, we've seen people go away and still play professional leagues somewhere, whether it's overseas or across code or something, come back and not be anywhere near the player that they were. Now, this guy has basically hasn't been able to do anything for the last 2 years. So he's going to be coming back, if he does come back next year, with not much under his belt. So that's a really hard thing to come back from, to come straight into this league, which with the rule changes the last 6 months, it's just become next level. So really worrying signs there. But I think with Manly as well, you touched on the 2 losses in the finals. For mine, this was all from the year when they let go of absolute mental blank all of a sudden, but they let go of the prop. What's his name? Aiden
Fanua-Blake.
Aiden Fanua-Blake. There we go. That was a big loss for them. And then I just think they lost Sirinen during the year as well. So during the year, this is the thing with a lot of people get confused and they get a bit they go off with form a bit too much. Manly had a pretty easy run into the finals, and their makeshift second rowers and things like that, the young guns. Ola Tamatu, no doubt, he's a really exciting young player. But when it comes to those hard games, that finals football that means something a bit more, you need those seasoned sort of guys in there. You can't have too many of these guys that are sort of just been brought into the grade. For mine, Manly in those two losses were bashed. Their forward pack was their weak link, and it was exposed massively in those last couple of games in the finals. So Tommy couldn't do anything because they couldn't get any go forward. And that's the same as their wingers as well. I know their wingers have scored a lot of tries, but for mine, they lack a bit of go forward for those first tackle or two. And that's my biggest criticism for them. That's why I didn't include either of them in my team of the year, because I think Toe does an amazing job for that. And they really missed all that. Turbo can't do everything. He needs the forwards. They really need to go to market for mine and sign one or two seasoned forwards and let these younger guys have maybe one more year to be floating in and out from a bench spot. They were bashed, and it really showed.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because I think I was impressed by how their four pack stepped up, but when, like you said, it is, don't go off form too much, because you go off against
even Schuster. He was at the start of the year 5'8", and then he got put into a makeshift second row role. Now, he done a great job there, don't get me wrong, but he's not a seasoned second rower. And the first week they versed the Storm. The Storm have seasoned second rowers. They got obliterated in that department. The second week they versed trying to think back here who they ended up versing. They versed the Roosters, and Roosters were under strength, and they got through them in the end. But then they got bashed again. So by the Bunnies, and they've got seasoned performers there. They've got Sewer on one side. He's so good. You need seasoned players, seasoned props, and second rowers in those big games. It speaks volumes.
Yeah, and just we'll move across, but it just made me think, and we didn't question it at the time, but it's now I'm thinking about it. Like, did they have to find the way to put Curtis Seron in there? Obviously not a prop, but like you said, he's a bigger body for second row, and he's experienced too. So yeah, and his name was in the New South Wales Blues conversation a couple of years ago, not as like a must be picked, but his name was brought up for good reason. He's a solid player. But I agree on the points you've made there. And we'll move on to the Rabbitohs. Obviously made the grand final, but what's your sliding doors moment for them, Joel?
The couple of weeks there where they got pumped by 50, especially the Penrith game. And it was mid-year, and the reason I say that is because obviously it snapped them into gear, but there was a few other sliding door moments in around that time frame that I want to focus on as well. They told Reynolds that he wasn't wanted at the club anymore. They couldn't give him the years he wanted. Sooner he then signed with the Broncos. Wayne Bennett also, they kind of knew, but he confirmed that he was gone as well, and probably not staying around the club next year for that coaching role either. So it all sort of happened together, and it was that moment I felt like the playing group and Wayne got together and just said, all right, we've got 12 weeks, whatever left. Let's just put everything we've got into this, and let's go and try and win this grand final, which they went also close to doing. For mine, if Latrell plays the other day, they win. It was that close, and losing him obviously was massive. That'd be another sliding doors moment for South. It's sort of you could pick two, and I chose to choose that one, but you can easily go down the Latrell Mitchell route as well. But yeah, I just thought that moment where they got beat by 50 by Penrith, they didn't look great. They got demolished on the park, and then they sort of came back and just sort of went on a bit of a winning streak and really turned it around.
Yeah, bit of a reality check, that one, wasn't it? And all the things got brought up about a team has never won a premiership with 50 points, but I think they kind of, obviously that still stands true. They were unable to do it, but I think they used it as rather than a confidence, detractor. They use it as a way just to give them a bit of a kick up the arse, like we mentioned previously, how those losses can do. And I think, yeah, that's the best thing to do with adversity. You've got to use it as fuel, to say, hey, we're not as shit hot as we thought we were, especially when they were tallying up every other team. I think the only losses this season come up against the Panthers and the Storm, if I've got that right. I think they lost to the Storm twice, and they lost to the Panthers twice as well. And I don't think they lost another game, is it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure, eh? Do you think?
Yeah, I think they did. They only finished one win from the minor premiership as well. Obviously, a little bit in terms of the points differential there, but they were right there. They were right there and thereabouts towards the back end of the season. So they had a pretty remarkable year. For majority for mine, they flew under the radar.
They did. And it was, to be fair, like, you don't see two teams. It's rare to see one team only lose 3 games, let alone 2 games. Let alone 2 teams. And yeah, just thinking they lost 5 games all year. 3 to the Panthers, 2 to the Storm, and obviously the other one of the Panthers was in the grand final. So yeah, like you said, you mentioned the Latrell injury. I think you are right. But it's one of those things. I wonder if that was a fueling thing as well. They had to kind of. Like, I think their identity would have been like they had an identity shift where they played tough footy, and I just wonder if that was ignited because of Latrell. Not obviously you're better off team with Latrell, but I just wonder if they realize, okay, we're not going to win this way without him. So yeah, how can we change? I just wonder if they would have still been that same team. But saying that, I think ever since that loss, like you said, there was a bit of a kicking together, and especially that Warriors game. Where they scored 60 but conceded 22. And ever since that, their defense was the best in the comp. So, yeah, interesting. And that just shows Wayne Bennett, his way of just, showing that to use those bad times as kind of motivators as well. I remember him doing that last year too. So we'll move on very shortly. But I just remember last year, like, they weren't traveling hot, and then they still were 1 game away from the grand final. Adam Reynolds step over the 40-20 line, potentially of getting there as well, being 6th place entering that final series. So the Wayne Bennett factor. So and this is a conversation for another day, but yeah, it's going to be interesting where they're at with no Bennett and no Reynolds next year.
It was sort of like Wayne Bennett just sat around and watched like a spectator. And then once it got through Origin period, he then decided to put his coach's hat on and go, all right,
yeah,
now it's time to go, boys.
Yeah, now I get paid. This is why,
Yeah, basically, yeah. I'm done with my pies and being a spectator. It's time to go.
Yeah, man. I want to go into the Panthers now. Obviously, who faced the Rabbitohs in the grand final and ultimately won it. This one for me, I've gone to a decision that I understand it got made because this is a lineup change I'm talking about, but I was just looking back today at why it got changed, and it's the Stephen Crichton from centre to wing. Charlie Staines obviously had an impressive start to his career last year, scoring 4 tries in his debut, then scoring 2 tries before getting injured in the first half again. I can't remember who it was, but basically 6 tries in what would that be? 120 minutes, which is just sensational. And, a guy that has been, talked about his pace, didn't look out of place at all. But he wasn't. And then this season, look, he didn't do anything too wrong, but he definitely didn't do anything to, impress footy fans too much. But at the end of the day, like, Panthers was still winning. Lesser concerns at the end of the day. But it was the round 21 was his last game of the regular season, and he played in the qualifying and semi-final because of injury. But he got dropped then, and I'm just looking back at it now, and a lot of it was to do with safety under the high ball, and also just the form of Momorowski as well, who I think needs to really get a bit more credit here, because he has been playing in systems where they've ultimately gone and won the premiership. He was part of that Roosters team that he played the game before the grand final. I think it was his first ever game or his second ever game, something ridiculous. In Storm last year was part of that system without being the grand final. So he knows what the environment's about, and he was able to, despite some little faults in his game, he really stepped up in the finals as well. But it also allowed Crichton to go back to fullback, where Crichton's an interesting one because we did our positional rankings, and I don't know if you had Crichton in your centre of the year ballot, but I personally didn't, and I just felt like, even though in terms of centres, he is probably one of the better ones in the game, but I felt like when he was having his best games, it was at fullback when he was there, and at the back end at wing, because he was getting more touches, he was getting more involved. Where at centres, I just felt like he was just able to, and it wasn't noticed as much because the Panthers team has got so many, guns in their like a lot of threats in their arsenal, I should say, that we didn't really think too much of it. But the shift to wing was huge for me, and just dropping Charlie Staines, especially when you were so confident in getting rid of Mansour, because the idea was to have Charlie Staines to drop him, even though you guys were traveling hot, to notice, he's doing okay. We're still winning games. He hasn't become a liability at this stage, but I'm gonna tinker it. That takes a lot of balls, and we saw in the grand final that payoff in spades. He ran over 200 meters, and obviously the intercept. He talked about Serrato having goes at him at training about his defense, and that's huge too, because that's new. Even though wingers, they get a lot of slack, it's not an easy position to play, especially the amount of minutes you have to get through, and defensively as well, especially building that partnership. So for me, that was a huge moment that even I overlooked at the time. And I also want to mention that Charlie Staines one. He also didn't get picked when Brian To'o was injured as well. Brian To'o suffered an injury, obviously, about that back end, and he wasn't playing no games either. So he was really sticking strong. And I don't want to make this having shots at Charlie Staines, but I think it is really key to kind of give a lot of credit to Nathan Cleary and Ivan Cleary and his coaching staff here for making a call that, from the outside, it's not a call that we were pointing at this needs to happen. Like, it was one of those things like they'll survive without it, but he knew that could be tinkered, and ultimately it paid off.
Yeah, I think Crichton played the team game, obviously, and because if you ask the question to anyone, if you say, who would you rather in your team, Stephen Crichton or Paul Momorowski, you're choosing Crichton every day of the week. So it was the team was put first, so you credit him for that, and it made the back line, for mine, stronger overall. On Charlie Staines, I think it shows how quickly an NRL career can be the won or lost, and he wasn't really great this year. We've got to call a spade a spade. I think he was pretty poor defensively on that side. So, and I just think he's a smaller body, and that's becoming extinct in this game with how reliant it is. If you're a smaller body, you got to be like Toe. You got to be able to get your 200 plus meters each game and just be a running machine. And Staines wasn't getting involved. It was a heavy reliance on the fullback and To'o to get him out of trouble each week. And then moving Crichton over out there to wing helped him with that. So then all of a sudden there was three bodies again. Anyway, they kicked it, whether it was middle or to the sides, someone was going to run it back hard. And then the second and then the third run was going to be good as well. And the teams had to be on their back foot. So I'm interested to see what happens this offseason with Charlie Staines. I know he's still there, but there's a lot of talk with Penrith needing to get their salary cap in the place with keeping majority of this side together and trying to do a dynasty of their own. And I think Charlie Staines might fall victim of that. And I don't know if he'll be there much longer as a Panther, whether it's this year he goes or next year. I think he'll be one of the victims.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's definitely, they can afford to lose him. I think there's still a lot of potential out of Staines. Obviously, like I mentioned, had a really hot start. And also, you mentioned a good point about his size. I think he has the frame and a few little attributes where I think you could definitely see him being a bigger winger too. He's not like a guy, like his size doesn't consume me. Like at the moment, I think, like you said, it got found out a bit. But I think there is, when you just look at him, you can just see him being able to be an impact in terms of being more of a running winger. But yeah, he needs to put that size on. But like you said, I do think I'll be surprised if he is a Panther for too much longer. I think they will have to cut ties with him. And just on Crichton, I just will be interested to see what his role is for next year. I think ultimately he's their long-term fullback. But hey, Dylan Edwards once again proving that it's not always about the talent, but how you fit in that team. And he has done a great job for them. And we'll go into the last one. Now, I'm grinding my teeth here. I don't know how to feel about this one. I think you're going to stitch me up. How harsh are you going to be? Obviously, you've got my beloved Melbourne Storm. What is the moment for you that, could ultimately have seen the Melbourne Storm turn into their season turn a different direction than it ended up being, which was not the Premiers, sadly?
All right, there's not a sliding doors moment as such. There's, for mine, an issue that the club didn't fix for the whole year, which for mine hung around like a bad smell, and that's probably the reason why they didn't end up doing what most of us predicted they would do. That for mine was they didn't nail down the spine. There was too many question marks around, and this obviously wasn't helped with injury as well. So I'm not blaming everything just on the what was done, but there was just always that constant noise around Brandon Smith, Harry Grant. Hines ended up coming out of his shell and proved a huge difference. And then Pappy came back and wasn't great for a while. He wasn't his confident self that we've always seen. He ended up finding that towards the final series, which was good. I just think there was just a lot of toing and froing. They just couldn't nail down, especially that hooker and fullback position. I just felt like that was probably the reason why. And then you could probably argue there was that the situations with the backs as well. Obviously, Adokar and Olam's side was great, but just the Jennings and side, there was just always, again, through injury or whatnot, just couldn't really settle on that side of things either. Remus Smith is obviously the centre, I think, moving forward for the club, and that's what they want to happen. It was just a little bit of, for the first time in a while for the Storm, they just had a few injuries play a part, where I think they've been pretty steady with that throughout the years. And then the Cam Smith factor, that was massive to see in that last game, which points me to the big one for mine. And it's a massive off-season for this bloke. I think this is the biggest off-season this guy's ever had, and he needs to show he wants to be a Melbourne player, and that's Munster. I thought he was, and this isn't just for what happened on the weekend that we saw, but this was more because his whole year for mine, when you actually look back at it, he wasn't that good at all. And whether it was for the Storm or for Maroons, it sort of looked like the whole year he was in a bit of party mode. It was sort of like, I'm Cam Munster, I can sort of do what I want. If it wasn't for Jerome Hughes, I don't think Melbourne have anywhere near the year that they had, because I think Hughes really stepped up. Demands being one of the better players now in the game, which I think people are starting to click onto. He was really, really good for mine. Munster needs to pick it up. They've got a big reliance on Munster next year. Now that Hines is gone, he's the main 5'8", and he will be for the next couple of years. I don't think Cooper Johns is up to that level. So if they do lose Munster, it leaves a massive hole. Munster needs to show you Melbourne Storm supporters he wants to be at the club and reward Bellamy, who's always been there for him, stuck his neck out several times for him now. He's got to go big, and I'd love to know your thoughts on Munster, and then I guess where you summed up the sliding doors moments for the Storm this year.
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of weeks ever since the grand final fallout, and it's kind of confirmed a few of your worst fears. Obviously, you mentioned the Smith. I thought we were definitely obviously going to feel his loss the most in finals footy, and we definitely saw that. I'll just sum up your main points about the spine. Like you said, I'm not too concerned about that because a lot of it was injury affected, but it is safe to say that the two biggest seasons that have fallen short for me were when we switched Hughes and Croft last minute. So that showed we were minor premiers the whole year and we switched it up. Not saying that was the worst call, but it's just like to be undecided that close to the finals is real concerning. And I think, and even though, like this one was a bit less on the fault of Bellamy as it was injuries and stuff like that, but it is a bit concerning for me. But just to touch on your Munster point, it is really tough because the three main guys that are associated with the Melbourne Storm over their successful run are Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith, and Billy Slater. And Melbourne Storm are known for being a professional side. They have high standards. Their main players don't put a foot wrong in those three. And normally the ones that do are forgotten about. And I think at the end of the day, those ones that have put a foot wrong aren't as crucial to our organisation. We can find parts to replace them with, to say. And obviously Maloney's an example. Maloney was in there young, and he's probably the best player to flourish outside the Storm system in terms of not working out for us as in our team. But Munster is a huge part of a team. There's no doubt about that. When he is on form, look, if there's anyone continuing with the three best players in the game, which I often reference, Teddy, Turbo, and Cleary, I think Munster is right up there, especially when you talk about big games. But in terms of Queensland, he was unable to do it this year, and then this season he was unable to do this. I thought he was picking up a little bit of form, but ultimately fell short. But in terms of the stuff off the field and his attitude, it is really tough. Like I said, when we've had to deal with these rat bags, quote unquote, it's been easy to stick to our standards, stick to what we preach, because at the end of the day, we can replace them. With Munster, look, we've come down pretty hard on them with our punishments, especially the rehab stuff and the alcohol ban and a few other things as well, and the fines obviously too. So we've stuck to our word on that. But how far do you go? Do you go to the point, like you said, Craig Bellamy has done a lot of favours to him in the past. So I think Storm at the moment are sticking to, their bread and butter, to what makes them a club. They aren't making any excuses. They're not prioritising him because he is there. He might not be the best player at the moment, but ideally you want him to be your best player. And he has got the best resume out of the others. So I'm proud of the Storm that they are at the moment sticking to it, but Munster's got to prove that he wants to be there. And if he shows any behaviours that he doesn't want to be there, this is really hard to say, because his talent, it's one of those double-edged swords. His talent is so great, but I'd be okay with losing him, because the club is bigger than one player, and we will do it. We were able to, we've won premierships without Billy. We've run premierships without Cronk. We're so close without Smith this year. Our club is bigger than one player. It's just really hard when we know how talented Munster can be. But at the end of the day, I'm confident that if we let go of Munster, we can make it work. It might not be, obviously, we'll be a much better team with Munster. But in terms of, keeping to what makes this organisation tick, why we have been able to make final series after final series. Munster's his worst result was, basically this year, and his worst result's a prelim. And that says a lot about him, that says a lot about the team. But I think at the end of the day, if he is unable to get his form right on the footy paddock in terms of not even in terms of playing well, but just being ready, not being in party mode, like you said, and obviously not being party mode off the field, we'll keep him. But if he doesn't show that, this is his last chance in terms of any major acts as well. So for me, it is serious, but I have to go and say that I'm confident that he can be replaced if he is unable to, sort himself out.
I want to ask you one more question once, but quickly, you make a good point, was that with Munster's career as such, if we looked at Munster quickly, and I know we're going to stop this shortly, but throughout his career, throughout his career, he's had the big three, as you mentioned. So at the start of when he first arrived, he had Slater, Cronk, Smith. Bellamy can only do so much, so he's got a heavy reliance on his players to keep players like him in line, and they would have done that easily. As soon as Munster tried to do something, clip on the ear by Smith or Cronk or Slater, all right, crap, sorry, I'll pull my head in. Then we had, obviously, Cronk go, and then it was the still Slater and Smith show. All the players there knew if we're out and about and they're there, we've got to keep ourselves on the straight and narrow. Let's not do anything stupid. Otherwise, we're getting a clip across the year. Slater then retires. The Chiefs still there. They're not going to do anything while Smith's there. And I think the club knew that. So the first year where none of those are there and there's no sort of babysitters as such, Munster's become what he's become. And I think a lot of Storm supporters are getting fed up with it. I can see by your expressions and voice that you are getting fed up with it as well. And that says a lot because he used to be a player that Melbourne loved. And I think the question I want to ask you about this is, in the lead up to the finals, and much has been named about it, he was talking about going to the new side that hasn't even been officially announced yet, saying he wants to be coached by Bennett and he wants to play at the new side. That means he's only got this year left at the club. He's going at the end of next year, 2022. He'll be gone. And to be honest with you, it will probably look like and seem half of next year his mind will be with the Dolphins, who it pretty much seems like that's going to be it. What does that make you feel like? The fact that in the lead up to the finals, first of all, he's singing about that. And then second of all, you might only have one more year left with Munster.
Yeah, a bit to dissect, but when
first, just quickly, while you think of your answer, I'll just say right now for the Dolphins fans and that, I'd be really second guessing signing Munster at the moment. I don't think he is your key signing you base your first season off for mine. I think there's better players out there to build a club around. I don't think he's necessarily the one to do so.
Yeah, and actually, it's a good way to kind of progress into my statement here. Is I was listening to the Bloke in the Bar podcast today, and they were talking about Wayne Bennett and talking about, and then after, I think before that, they were mentioning about Munster. And then originally I thought, oh, well, everything that's happening, and I really kind of looking ahead, like now this is very much likely that Munster will be 2022, which is kind of the dream kind of marquee player. And then I was just thinking, like, if I was the Redcliffe and I had to pick one guy, I don't think Munster would be my man. He wouldn't. I'd go somewhere else. I really would. And look, and then I want to use your analogy before about being babysit. Look, I thought we can't use the young card anymore. He is a veteran. Well, easing into that veteran status. He is a leader. I thought he was a leader. So ultimately, I was okay with, I thought it was a great time in his career for Smith to be departed, because I thought he didn't have to be babysitted anymore and he could be the babysitter, so it's safe to say. And it was proved wrong. Hasn't stepped up. So ultimately, look, it was just this week was just a real exclamation point on he hasn't taken that step. And look, whoever, and you touched on Hughes earlier, I was so impressed with Hughes this year. And if we put a lot of our focus around him, and even if that means we have a young budding half, I'm not completely off this Munster board. That's what I'm saying, but I'm just saying he's on his very, 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 like he's holding on to his fingertips here. Yeah, for sure.
I agree. And I think if, in a way, Storm might have wished this behaviour happened, or if it was happening earlier in a bit more public knowledge, because they probably would have ended up keeping Hines, because as we're saying, the Munster's probably only there for one more year, and Hines would have been great. He's younger. I think he looks natural fit for a 5/8 role, and he could have easily been the answer for the club for the next 5 years to link with Pappy and Hughes. And so, yeah, it's a massive interesting year for the Storm, which we'll get into obviously down the track.
Yeah, mate. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I'll actually got to thank you for allowing me to get that off my chest. Definitely wasn't expecting to do that today, but I think I've needed it because I think I haven't really been able to talk about it to anyone. And honestly, and I didn't really know I had this much stress, but it has caused me, yeah, it's upset me, like you can see. Because there's so much to celebrate about the Storm. And sometimes I just don't, I don't want to get carried away because I can. It's easy because we've had a really good run. Well, there's no doubt about that. But there's still stuff that is going to annoy you, and this is definitely up there in the recent years. So yeah, I think that's a good way to end. So there's the part one of our sliding doors moments. Obviously looking at the top 8 teams. We'll see next week if we'll do the bottom 8 teams. Look, got a lot of content to get to over the off season. So I'm sure that we will be able to touch on this next week, especially if Joel is keen. But I want to thank everyone for listening. Hope everyone does enjoy their off season as well. But don't you worry, we'll still be here. Can't promise we'll be here every week, but we'll definitely be in your ear. Joel, got any last thoughts, mate? Thanks for coming on once again, brother. Really appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Thanks for this. And everyone in the GM videos will be back. They'll be back published this week, and then back to filming the top 8 next week. So thanks for all the love once again. Really appreciating it. And just a quick note for the players and that out there. Who knows if any of them listen, but I think this shows how quickly an image or the club identity can be tarnished by individuals. So just seriously think about something before you do it. It's just, you look at some of these things that people do, and there's no doubt there's going to be a few more in the next couple of weeks, and you just sit there and you go, why? Like, did you have to just do that? Did you have to just do that for a couple of minutes? And if you're going to go out and party and do whatever young people do, no worries. But tell anyone who you're hanging out with, no phones. Like, I don't know why it's so difficult these days, but just think about it, guys, because you can tarnish your club's image and how good they've been for so long. As we're seeing now with the Storm, it's the first time in a while that their image has been questioned because it's been so good. And it's just because of a silly video that it was just stupid. I just can't believe it.
Yeah, 100% agree, mate. And just, to touch on that, if you want to, obviously, if you're still listening, I'd like to pass you on to Cameron Smith's kind of what he was speaking about when he was asked about this issue. I think he summed it up brilliantly. It's not just representing Cameron Munster badly, but Cameron, like himself, because he's part of that organisation, and that's who Munster's representing as well. So you just think about your actions before you do them, because it's not just going to be consequential for yourself, but like you said, your club, your organisation, and your teammates. So, yeah, bit of a sour note to end off. But hey, cheers team, and catch you guys next week.